So there's stillness. And then there's a reaction to the stillness, or there's a response to the stillness that is something like anxiety.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the stillness isn't anxious. One could say the stillness is peace, huh? Rest. So what is stillness. And the mind or thought is the source of anxiety.
I think in the previous times that my response to such anxiety would be to say, do a sadhana or some habit to this way one deals with anxiety. Right.
Right.
And then maybe I would say lack of faith, but maybe just that I've changed and it doesn't really do it in the same way, or maybe I'm changing my perspective on whatever that sadhana was, and I think it's something like that.
Right.
However, that's maybe unsettling because that was the remedy.
Right. Well, and I don't know what sadhana you were exactly doing, or how maybe there's more than one.
A number of them, so but interestingly, they've all just changed. I have a different, and I think that it's not like I'm saying I'll never do them again, but
Right.
not until I have another or a bigger perspective, I think, maybe.
So whether we call it a sadhana or we don't, simple awareness to this, or attentiveness, noticing, particularly noticing the distinction between the stillness, which is what is, and the activity of the mind, that the stillness itself is peaceful, but it's the mind that isn't peaceful. And there's nothing particularly wrong with that. In a sense, just seeing the distinction is enough. You could say it's insight, you could say it's vigilance, you could say it's attentiveness, a kind of mindfulness. But it is to bring attention to this moment, right? To now, because it's now that the stillness is, that the in-between, as you were talking about, is. And the now is the stillness. This is still now, here, now. It's still, it's peace. It's free of anxiety, or even if anxiety is brought to it, it in itself is free of anxiety. So anxiety is our activity. Just to see that actually can shift things, or is a shift in itself. Because then you can see that the anxiety is extra. Now, it doesn't mean necessarily that you're able to switch it off, but just seeing that it's extra, that it's not based in anything, because where is the stillness? It's here and it's now. Anxiety is for the future. It's like this word waiting. Waiting is for the future. It's like the opposite of this, of just being with the stillness. It's not really opposite, though. It's more like an added thing. So opposite's not quite right. It's an added thing. Of course, the anxiety takes place in the present as well. But to see the distinction between the meaning that we make, which we're constantly doing. It's like a function of mind to make meaning. And there's moments when the mind stops and there's no meaning, and lo and behold, there's no anxiety. But when the mind returns, then meaning returns, and meaning is either, wow, this is good, I'm doing well, I'm mindful, or it's like, oh, I'm still anxious, oh, this means something, whatever. Or I'm suggesting a new meaning, which is, all that's important is I see the distinction between my mind or my judgments or my assessment of the situation. Oh, this stillness, what does this mean? Or my opinion about stillness. You can use it, whatever words you want for this kind of mind, thoughts, imagery that is extra, that is our meaning-making activity. And you can, suggesting the shift is to make the meaning, oh, I can see how they're distinct. That's sadhana, that's vigilance. I can see that mind is just extra. And, it can even be like, oh, there's anxiety in the body. Oh, there's anxiety in the body because of thoughts of, oh, what does this mean? But actually, stillness is without meaning. It just is. Peace is without meaning. It just is. And as soon as you have that as, like, I suggest you say that to yourself, like, oh, it just is, that becomes the meaning now. It's because there's a narrative. The narrative can be as simple as, I'm being mindful. I mean, if you look at traditional Buddhist Vipassana meditation, one way of doing Vipassana meditation, which is, very traditional, it's what Buddha had people do, is when you're lifting your foot, you're saying lifting, lifting, lifting. I mean, before that, the mind was saying something else, but now you're giving the mind something like, oh, I'm doing sadhana. Yay. I'm lifting, 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 setting your foot down, putting it down, doing this, like, you're doing it. Then I'm doing sadhana. I'm doing it well. It's just like holding the hand of the mind, giving it because it's always going to create meaning, giving it something to call meaning. I'm doing it right. Oh, look. But meanwhile, attention is just aware of the actual lifting. But there's also the saying, lifting, lifting, lifting. That's what you're thinking, right? It's like, and at some point, all of a sudden, the mind forgets to say lifting, lifting, but the lifting still happens and the putting down. Now there's no words, and you are simply present and no mind. I don't want to say that's success. I'm just saying that happens, because it's fine to be lifting, lifting, lifting. And it's also fine to be like, well, I wonder if I'm going to be able to pay my taxes. That's fine too, but it isn't anything having to do with what is. Yeah. Time and place for everything, or I'm really bad at this. I'm a bad practitioner. I'm not mindful enough. Oh, I missed again. All of that, totally useless. As you can, right? So in the same way, I mean, when is it not intermediate, really? Everything's intermediate. I know, there's times when we're engaged, so we don't think it's intermediate, but really, we're always between moments, right? Any moment in the midst of activity that you stop for a moment inside and notice what is apart from mind. And I say apart, I don't mean that mind has to stop, but then noticing things are what they are, and then the commentary is there. That's the intermediate again. You're back in the intermediate. Does this make sense?
I know it does, and I think also the space between the in-breath and the out-breath, and the out-breath and the in-breath.
Yep. Yep. And the space that takes place in the middle of the in-breath. And the space that takes place a quarter into the in-breath, and then halfway into the in-breath, and then 3/4 into the in-breath, and then at the end of the in-breath. See, you can find space because every line is nothing but, we learned that in geometry, didn't we? Points, right? And there's empty space between all of those points. But yeah, breath is the one that's usually used because it's obvious break. You know, everybody, at some point, it goes the other direction. You know, like, okay, there. So it stops. There is that kind of notion that we've been, you know, habituated into, that's like horizontal, or I forget what the sociological word for it is. I mean, there's language for this that having to do with linear time and cyclical time and all of that. But there's a kind of like, someday I'll get there thing that we have. And if we introduce the notion that what it means to get there is to be now here, then rather than, you know, the road stretching out ahead, there can be a sinkhole of this present moment in which everything comes in, and you realize, oh, that's success. Like, oh, not moving from this. You know, not looking for improvement. The only improvement is to be more here now, like not move from this moment now, here.
I guess I don't know, thing that I may have historically gotten hung up on was the discipline part of that, because there's still the discipline to do any sadhana, but the discipline to even to be here now,
Right.
you know, to remind yourself there, and that's, can be very important. It's just that it can be a limitation apparently too, or at least in my case it can, in the sense of that it becomes in itself, it takes a life of its own, like, oh, I wasn't disciplined today, you know, or I'm, you know what I mean?
Totally. It's actually, yeah. And you know, this is a trap, but it isn't actually in the discipline. So, you know, Papaji was funny about this because he talked a lot about non-effort, about not making any effort, about not practicing, about not doing sadhana all the time. We talked about it continuously, 24/7. And he also talked about being free of desire and being vigilant. And as soon as he brought that in, I went, oh, this is the glass is half full and half empty. It's like he brought in the other side of it. Because vigilance, it's not a sadhana in the sense of going somewhere, which is actually what he wanted to cut off in people. Moving somewhere, going somewhere, growing later, developing into something, right? And at the same time, you could understand just the capacity to not move forward is development. You can see it that way. And if you speak it that way, it doesn't, then it's fine. Then that's fine. Vigilance is like that. The thing is that you're not moving from anywhere. I mean, to be vigilant is to basically make to guard what you are. So the effort is only effort in the sense that you are not leaving where you are. There's a cost-benefit analysis in there where it is more exhausting to leave than to stay. But because our legs are so used to moving, it's an effort to stop them from moving. And that's an effort. But there's far more energy expended in our concerns, far more energy, expended in our desires, far more energy expended in our plan. Not plan, see, it's tricky because you do planning, right? That's the working mind, but you do it now. But to emotionally be in the future, to emotionally be in the past, to find yourself in that takes far more energy than the energy it takes to go, oh, let me not do that, put that aside. So like when you're saying, oh, I messed up, immediately that's past. There's no right now. What is now? Like, you cannot, like, to just clearly see what you can't change. I mean, there's very little that we really can do. There's very little that we really can change. What we really, where we have the most capacity to change is in just this, in this moment, letting go of what is the idea of a past failure. Because it's an idea and a feel and all of that. There's a feeling and an idea, all that stuff, to just put that aside, because we don't have any control over what we did 5 seconds ago, because it already happened. So we now have no control over it. So everything that happened a split second ago, way back to your birth, you have no control over that anymore. It is not in your hands. You have zero control over it. You've never had control over the past. You never have control over the future. You never have control over public events. You never have control over your family. You never have control over what other people think of you. You never do. All of that is interdependent origination. You could say it's the freedom of other beings, if you want to speak that way. It's all the mechanics of the unfolding. And it has nothing, no desire to do your will. It doesn't have any connection to your desires. So you don't have any control over that. But what we do have control over, and one can argue that you don't even have control over this, but let's just, for the sake of our direct experience, our human experience, you have control over this, seeing this, over letting go in the moment of thinking that it should be otherwise, or of at least seeing the distinction between what you really can control and can't control, moment by moment. And there's a lot of, kind of how we have reminders on our cell phones now, like, oh, remember this, all right? Well, every time when you feel upset, that's a reminder. Oh, I'm thinking about the past, or I'm thinking I have more control than I do in this moment. In this moment, what is there? Let go of that. Here you are. So it's a kind of mindfulness, letting go of the past, letting go of thoughts of the future, and simply being here. It doesn't mean that you don't plan things. You can plan things. I'm talking about that emotional stickiness thing, that thing. Now, feelings of regret, will still be there even when you go, oh, that's not the past. And there's the feeling still, like, just like there's a blush in the face after you've feel embarrassed. Like you go, oh, well, there's no need to be embarrassed. But your face is still red, right? Okay, there's still a feeling of tingling. Okay, so then in that moment, the feeling of that and any meaning that you make out of that, just that one, let go. And it may not be 100%, doesn't have to be 100%. Just now, this moment. Let's see what happens if we go that. This moment, this moment, this moment. In fact, you can even just say, I'll do it halfway each time. You know, I'll hold on a little bit. But just see that you're doing that. You're kind of unnecessarily suffering. I'm not saying that we can always just snap it, but just this time. Not always. Because always is like, but in the future, like now I'm planning again. Just now. Well, how will I know if I'm really doing it right? See, that's what we want. We want a linear thing where we could see progress and all. No, just this moment. This is very close to dropping ego kind of thing, because when you're not keeping track, you can't take credit. Because taking credit is, again, another kind of, oh, well, that was good or bad or whatever. In this moment, acting what feels like appropriate, and that's all. It's very simple. Does that make sense?
No, it totally makes sense. And I could just see how the mind circles back, so I have to be disciplined to do that.
Yeah, you only have to be disciplined for a moment, though.
Yeah. But there's sort of discipline about remembering or something. It's like you say, like the timer. And I'm exaggerating this, but I can see that historically this has really snowballed into something that's really, paralyzing in the past for me.
I hear you. I do. I really do. It's really the disease of self-improvement that so many of us are engaged in, because well, it's just the nature of the mind, you could say. But if you don't have self-improvement, it's very hard to have a story. A lot of it has to do with a sense of being somebody, So even being somebody who's not able to do it is being somebody. It's like, oh, I'm a messed up person. I'm just not quite the, I'm trying, but I'm not able to do it. Kind of all that stuff. It's like I've spent my whole life in the spiritual thing, and I'm still not whatever it is. That. We all got it.
I think that there's a parallel I do with learning to be a musician and practicing scales, for decades. And then, of course, I don't do that now. And I actually don't think that's, but I'm actually much more in the moment now playing, but I feel I sort of deserve to be that way because I have this bed of years of woodshedding.
You don't give yourself as much of a hard time because you've got years of training.
Yeah, because I have years of woodshedding, and so that, and I don't, we've discussed this before about jazz, and it's not just
right. Oh, definitely no.
But I feel that there's a kind of a honestly, when we talk stuff, I feel what you're saying. I feel it.
You do.
I think then there's this part that's just sort of analyzing it, like, how can I do this better or whatever.
Isn't that funny? Yeah, and it's just about not in each moment, just being aware of the distinction between what you can do and what you can't do. And then it drops away because you can't do anything about the past. And, you know, the mind and what is arising, if you make a distinction between the kind of meaning that you make of what arises, and you recognize that the thoughts, the mind is a meaning-making machine, then it's not that you can stop it making meaning, but you can make a meaning of transcendence, that just being aware of this moment, I no longer have to jump out of this moment here. And it does have to do with, I mean, all of these words like trust and faith and awareness and rest and shanti, peace, all of them end up being the same thing. It's just this. Like I say, it's like a sinkhole. If you realize that you're just actually, that's the goal, is not to be here, now, here, now. And you forget about credit, then even the momentary stuff, because you see, when the mind is there, even the momentary feeling of being good enough, which you definitely have because you've been practicing a lot, even that can be threatened given a certain, you know, circumstance. You know that. You know, if you are going to be playing with other people who you consider at least as good as you or better, then it starts to be like, okay, well, you know, and then maybe you have critics or very high up critics who are aware of what you think would be aware of your mistakes. Even if you're not making any, you'd be like, it's an intense, right? The only cure for that is like actually what we're talking about. And then if you have to make any meaning out of it at all, the meaning is that what Rebecca said so beautifully, the music is playing you. That you're an instrument for God or being or life that is using you. And even your practice was just nature or God or the universe practicing through you so that you would be a better instrument for it to play. Just like you have to clean your instrument, or, you know, people who play wind instruments, my brother, so I get new reeds all the time, has to make sure that it's all good before he can play. That's what being was doing in all of your practicing. It was putting a new reed in and getting the instrument, your body and you ready. But it's just, I mean, you know, music is a great metaphor for that, because it's a great truth for you, because life is living us. And so since life is living us, we can simply bring our attention to the moment. And in bringing our attention to the moment, we are participating in that. You know that when you're playing your instruments, you're certainly in the moment. You're right there, right? And then sometimes you're not thinking about being in the moment, and then there's flow. You can tell me about that. I'm just guessing at this. I know you could do a satsang explaining all of this. That's for sure. And correcting exactly what I just said. Being precise about it, because I don't know. I'm not a musician. But this is all being.
Well, there's this thing about being in the zone, and which doesn't necessarily mean that you're aware that you're in the zone.
Right. Well, you being aware of something is still training.
Right.
It's like in the moments when you're aware of it, then that's good, because that's a support for the moments when you're not. Right? So there's unconscious, there's unconscious incompetence, then conscious incompetence, then conscious competence, then unconscious competence, right? I mean, it's like you bring your awareness to, so that you can, so like in this case, you bring your awareness to this moment, right? But that's just the beginning. You don't really always do that. What you begin to notice, and this is the big secret, really, this is actually the key, quite honestly, is the realization, the recognition that there is only the moment. That it is the case, that it is effortless. And the rest has just been added like, a bad habit. And that's all it is. It's just on top of. And so when mind develops bad habits, it doesn't mean that it's not that a mind with the habits of creating past and future and being concerned and anxious about them is destroying stillness or somehow leaving this moment. That's not the case at all. You never can leave this moment. There is only this moment. There is only stillness. Nevertheless, the experience of, it's called a dream, the experience of something else happening is this merging of your mind with, or the apparent merging, this blending, this kind of confusion, this delusion, that your mind's assessment and meaning making and all of that is bound to what is, or is defining what is. But when that's seen and really recognized that there's only this moment, then it's obvious more and more that this is an extra effort that we're making. It might not happen all over at once. Certainly hasn't happened all at once for me, but there's big gaps where it's obvious, and then bigger gaps and bigger gaps. But it's like we are literally wasting our time, wasting our lives, fantasizing about what's in front of us rather than being what's in front of us, fantasizing about possibilities and what this and that, and it's the waste of our time. I mean, there is no time, but it's a waste of this moment. I mean, here, all the fears about dying too soon or not getting things done, it's all nonsense. Because you only have this moment. You don't own the past. It's gone for you. It's not like, well, I've lived these many years, now I have it. No, it's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. It's just a fantasy in the head, remembering, right? So it's not there anymore for you. So you don't own it. And the same is true for the future. It isn't really there for us. So when we have this moment, so we only die in this moment. We only can lose this moment. So a long life and a short life, total illusion that it matters. It doesn't mean anything because we only have this. We've already died to the rest of it. And the other is not born. It's just not. It's not real. So the more we let ourselves drop into the sinkhole. I mean, I love satsang because it's a chance to let yourself drop into the sinkhole here. But we can do it anytime. It's always in between breaths. Any second, anytime you want. You can be in this moment. And why? Because you really are only in this moment and you're fantasizing otherwise. And the fantasies can be painful. So when you feel you're in pain, let that be a graceful reminder, oh, like a bell ringing or a reminder on your phone. Oh. And when this momentum that's so big that you totally you're so involved, you don't even hear the ringer, the ding, you don't see the reminder on your phone, you're just totally involved. As soon as you notice, that's the moment. And have immediately just tons of compassion if that's what it takes for you to let go of beating up on yourself or whatever. If you need tons of compassion, give yourself tons of compassion. You might not even need that. You just go, oh yeah, it's gone. I have no control over what happened 2 microseconds ago, 1 microsecond ago. It's gone. I can get away with this? Yeah, you have to. That's the only way. Let yourself get away with everything that's happened in the past because it's not there anymore. What are you going to do? The way Papaji expresses, he said, you are freedom itself. It's not something that has to be earned. You are by nature freedom from all the past, all the future, everything that's ever happened, everything that ever will happen. You are always free of that because you are just this moment, here, now. Does that make sense, Andrew?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
And I hear you, brother. You know what you mean. Yeah. It's everybody. But this is the freedom, really, that we always can just let go of that trap of beating ourselves up for not doing it right, not being vigilant enough, not all of that stuff. It's like this moment, because all vigilance is really letting yourself off the hook for that. That's all it is, really. Here. And if you don't want to be vigilant and you want to just go into that, go ahead. But it's like taking vacation from our actual life, and eventually is going to be a little bit of a car wreck. But as soon as that happens, okay, I'll go back. You always have the capacity. Like Papaji said, God is not in a hurry.
Well, the typical one is I'm free. And how can I keep this? Or how
Right.
can
That's
how can
no
I
that
make it doesn't go away, and then it's it's the future and anxiety,
right. But that's why, if you're at that point, you may introduce the notion and then the seeing. Notion at first as a concept or as an idea, and then as a meditation thing, like to see if that is true for yourself, that it isn't your activity. In other words, the music is playing you. The freedom is not your control. It is the case. It is God doing it. It's not you doing it. Do you see what I'm saying? It doesn't depend on you. It isn't something that you have to keep going. You have to stop that activity of interfering with the fact of what is. And you can do that at any moment only. You can only do it in any moment. You can't do it continuously because there's no such thing as continuous. There's only now and then 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 now. You can't do it ahead of time. You can't stock up on this. So if you want to think like, well, I'm going to build the muscle. Okay, fine. If that's how you want to think, then the way you build the muscle is now and now and now and now. But at some point you realize, oh, I'm not building a muscle. It's reality. I don't have to do anything for it to be now. That's God's work. It's already the case. That's being's work. There's nothing you have to add to this moment. It's just you have to be here. You have to put attention here. That's all. You already are here as far as being is concerned. but you just notice the distinction between your mind and the meaning you make out of the situation and the simple experience of what is, or the simple this. Let yourself lose track. And you don't even have to go back and find where you left off. Just forget about it. Like there's fear that if I forget about it, I won't be able to do life and all of that. And like I tell you, I've never been able to do life anyway. And me doing this actually doesn't hurt my capacity to, pay my bills. I think, if you're the kind of person that's super efficient, you'll still be super efficient. If you're the kind of person who just gets by, then you'll be the kind of person who gets by. And that's perfect, because it doesn't mean anything anyway. It's like, it just means what it means. It's just like, you ever paint your
Krishna,
house
I thought you were going to say it doesn't hurt your capacity to not do life.
It doesn't do that either. That's right. You'll still be able to not do life just as well as before. Actually, I think it makes it more likely, quite honestly, that you'll pay your bills on time. But I don't know. Maybe it doesn't. Yeah. I mean, there is people who study this stuff scientifically and all that, and all those people, and they say, mindfulness, staying in the present, or whatever, this kind of mindfulness actually does increase your capacity to blah, 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 all that stuff. But that's like a side benefit. That's not a reason for it. I love this. Thanks so much, Andrew.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Great.
So helpful. Thank you.
So welcome.